Enjoy marrying your plumber. We won't be embarrassed with you. That was the last sentence my mother spat before cutting the call on my wedding day. The words didn't just sting, they hollowed me out. It wasn't the absence of their presence that broke me, it was their pride dressed as cruelty. Hi everyone. My name is Celine Marlowe. And on the day I promised forever, I learned that family can break you faster than any stranger ever could. I grew up believing love was supposed to be unconditional. But love in my house came with terms and price tags. My brother's wedding had been a spectacle. Chandeliers dripping crystals, a ballroom of 300 champagne that never stopped flowing. My parents grinned as if they had bought his happiness wholesale. But for me, their daughter, their silence filled the pews, their disdain slipped into the empty chairs. They didn't reject the wedding. They rejected me. And the cruelest part? They reduced the man I chose, the man who carried my world in his hands, to a punchline. A plumber. As if the calluses on his palms weren't proof of sacrifice. As if the dirt under his nails wasn't the mark of someone who built a life with sweat and honesty. For a moment the bouquet shook in my grip. I could have shattered too. Cried, ruined my makeup, let their betrayal define this day. But instead something inside me turned to ice. I lowered my veil, looked at the man waiting for me at the altar, and whispered words only he could hear. They'll regret this. My guests stirred, sensing the storm in my chest. And as the violins softened, I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering over a single photo that would make the very people who abandoned me come crawling back in panic. Because sometimes, the cruelest thing you can do to those who reject you is let them see exactly what they threw away. The photo I sent them wasn't of us at the altar. It wasn't even of me in my dress. It was a close-up of his face, my husband's. His sharp jawline, the quiet strength in his dark eyes, the kind of smile that belonged to a man who knew his worth even when the world dismissed him. But more than that, it was the truth stitched into every pixel, the confidence of a man who had built his own company from the ground up. They saw not just a plumber. They saw the CEO of one of the fastest-growing construction firms in the state. I didn't add a caption. I didn't need to. Within minutes my phone buzzed violently. First Mom, then Dad, then both again and again. Their desperation bled through the screen. Celine, answer the phone. Sweetheart, please, we didn't know. Let us explain. Don't do this to us. The same mouths that had spit venom were suddenly gagging on their own arrogance. But I didn't answer. Not yet. I let them sit in their own silence the way they had left me sitting in mine. I stood in the church, veil brushed with sunlight as my vows began. My husband's voice trembled with sincerity, while mine dripped with both love and defiance. Every word I spoke wasn't just for him, it was for them too. For every empty chair I spoke louder. For every insult I chose him harder. And with each ring of my vibrating phone in the background my strength grew. When we kissed, the room erupted in applause. I glanced at my phone again, 12 missed calls. Each one a reminder of how quickly pride can turn to panic when their plumber son-in-law looks like a king in a suit. Later, as we walked out under the arch of roses, my new husband squeezed my hand. They'll never see me for who I am, he whispered. I smiled, a sharp, defiant smile. Oh, they will, I said. But only when it's too late. And in that moment I knew, this wasn't just a wedding. This was the first chapter of a reckoning. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. It's silence. And silence can be deafening. I finally answered on the 13th call. Celine, my father's voice cracked through the speaker, all urgency, none of the venom. Honey, you didn't tell us he's not just a plumber, is he? I didn't reply right away. I let the silence drag, let them squirm inside it the way they had forced me to sit in humiliation. My new husband squeezed my hand, his thumb brushing my palm like a question. Are you sure? Yes, I said finally, my tone steady as stone. He's the man you refused to show up for. The man you spat on before you even knew his name. My mother jumped in, her voice dripping with desperation. Darling, please. We were misinformed. Well, you know how families talk. We thought he was beneath you. Beneath me. That was the word. As if love had a hierarchy. I glanced at my husband, standing tall, his suit pressed, his smile soft, and my chest burned. He builds homes for people who don't have them, I snapped, my voice trembling with both fury and pride. He gives jobs to men you'd never let through your front door. He takes nothing and turns it into something. And you thought that made him less. The line went quiet. My parents weren't used to my voice like this. Sharp, cutting, unapologetic. We made a mistake, Dad muttered finally. Let us make it right. I almost laughed. Make it right. Could they stitch themselves into the photographs they'd abandoned? Could they erase the stares of guests who noticed empty chairs where my parents should have been? Could they undo the echo of my mother's words, "We won't be embarrassed with you," ringing in my ears as I walked down the aisle alone? No, I said simply. You don't get to make it right. Not anymore. Before they could respond, I hung up. The church bells in the distance chimed like a closing chapter, like an exclamation mark on my refusal. My husband leaned in, kissed my forehead and whispered, "That was the strongest thing I've ever seen you do." And yet, even as we drove away in a shower of rose petals, I knew this wasn't over. My parents weren't the kind to give up easily. Pride doesn't bow quietly, it claws, it bargains, it schemes. But I was ready now. For the first time in my life, I wasn't their obedient daughter. I was my own woman. And they were about to learn what that meant. They showed up 3 days later. Not with flowers. Not with an apology card. No, my parents arrived in a gleaming black SUV, pulling up outside our new home as though nothing had happened. The same house my husband had built from scratch. Brick by brick, beam by beam, his fingerprints on every nail. I watched them from the window, their designer clothes stiff, their smiles painted on like masks that didn't quite fit. My mother adjusted her pearl necklace and my father checked his watch as though they were visiting business partners, not the daughter they'd abandoned at the altar. My husband glanced at me. "Do you want me to handle this?" "No," I said. My voice was ice. "This is mine." I opened the door, the summer air thick with tension. "Celine." My mother's voice was sugar-coated now, sticky and artificial. "Darling, we came to congratulate you. Such a beautiful wedding. We're so sorry we missed it." Missed it. As if they'd been delayed in traffic. As if it hadn't been a deliberate, calculated rejection. My father stepped forward, his smile thin. "We didn't realize who your husband truly was. Now that we know, we'd love to rebuild our relationship." The audacity made me laugh. Right there in their faces. It wasn't warm laughter. It was sharp, bitter, a sound I didn't recognize as my own. "You didn't realize?" I said slowly. "You mean you didn't realize he was rich enough to impress you? That's what this is about, isn't it?" Their smiles faltered, but pride kept them standing tall. "You're misunderstanding," my father said. "We only want what's best for you. Surely you don't want to cut family out of your life over a disagreement." Disagreement. That word landed like a knife. They hadn't just missed my wedding. They had tried to shame me out of love. And now they stood on my doorstep, pretending it was nothing more than a disagreement. Behind me, I felt my husband step closer, his hand brushing my back, grounding me. I didn't need to look at him to know what he was thinking. "Say what you need to say. I'll stand here forever." So I looked at them, really looked at them, and said the words I'd never dared to before. "You lost me. That day when you chose your pride over your daughter, you lost me. And no amount of money or groveling or fake smiles can buy me back." Their faces froze. For the first time in my life, I saw my parents not as giants towering over me, but as small, fragile people watching control slip through their fingers. And in that silence, I realized something chilling. They weren't here for me. They were here for him. I saw it in their eyes before they even spoke. They weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking past me at him. My husband had stepped into the doorway, his presence filling the frame, calm but unshakable. He didn't need to say a word. He just stood there in his tailored suit, the quiet authority of a man who had built everything with his own hands. And that's when my mother's smile stretched wider. Too wide. "Oh," she said sweetly, "you must be Adrian. We've heard so much about you." Liar. They hadn't asked a single question about him before the wedding. Not one. But now their voices dripped with rehearsed admiration. My father extended a hand, his tone suddenly humble. "Son, it's an honor. I have to admit we underestimated you. But now that we see what you've achieved, well, it's remarkable. Simply remarkable." I stood frozen, fury bubbling under my skin. "Son." He had never called anyone that with such fake warmth. But Adrian, he didn't flinch. He didn't shake his hand. He simply raised an eyebrow and said quietly, "I'm not your son." The silence that followed was brutal. I almost smiled. My parents exchanged a glance, the kind of look predators give when prey doesn't behave the way they expect. Then my mother pivoted, her voice smooth as glass. Darling, you know how families are. We were only concerned for Celine. But now that we know you can provide her with comfort, we'd love to make things right. Perhaps dinner? We could host. Invite some of our friends. Show them what a successful son-in-law we have. There was not love, not remorse, not an apology, a transaction. They wanted to parade him, use him to patch the cracks in their reputation. I felt my chest tighten, the humiliation crawling back. Not for me this time, but for him. For the man who had given me everything, only to be treated like a trophy they'd left on the shelf until it looked expensive enough to display. Adrian's hand found mine, steady, grounding. No, he said firmly. We're not interested in being your showpieces. My father's mask slipped for a fraction of a second, irritation, panic, greed flickering behind his eyes. My mother's smile wavered, her pearls trembling against her throat. And for the first time I realized, this wasn't just about my wedding. This was war. A war between the family I was born into, and the family I chose. And I was ready to choose again and again, no matter how ugly it got. The first strike came quietly, a whisper slipped into the wrong ears. 2 weeks after their visit I started hearing things. A friend from college pulled me aside at brunch, her tone hesitant. Celine, your parents told me you married a plumber in a rush. They said you were desperate. That's why they didn't come. I felt my chest cave, the air burning inside my lungs. My parents weren't just trying to win Adrian. They were rewriting the story, painting me as a pitiful daughter who had to settle. By the next weekend the poison had spread further. At the grocery store, Mrs. Langley, my mother's old bridge partner, cornered me between the peaches and pears. Such a shame, she whispered. Your parents did everything for your brother and then you, well, threw your life away on a tradesman. Tradesman. The word dripped like acid. Adrian found me in the parking lot minutes later, still shaking, my hands clenched so hard the car keys dug into my palm. They're turning people against us, I whispered. He pulled me close, his voice low but steady. Let them talk. Truth cuts deeper than gossip. And we have the truth. But I knew better. In my family's world, reputation wasn't just a mask. It was currency. And they were spending lies like gold coins, buying pity, buying distance, buying leverage. It all came to a head at a charity gala. One I hadn't planned on attending until Adrian insisted we go. You'll see, he said. We won't have to say a word. The ballroom glowed with chandeliers, crystal glasses clinking, laughter bouncing off marble floors. And at the center table sat my parents, radiant as ever, spinning stories. When they saw us arrive, the room shifted. Whispers sharpened. Eyes darted. My mother's smile froze mid-laugh, my father's jaw tensed. Celine, she cooed, her voice carrying across the room like a rehearsed line. Darling, we didn't expect you. Everyone's been asking about you and your husband. The pause before husband was a blade. Adrian tightened his grip on my hand, guiding me forward until we stood in front of them. I felt the crowd leaning closer, the air thick with curiosity, waiting for the showdown. I looked my mother dead in the eyes, my voice sharp enough to slice through the lies. You've been telling people, I settled, that he's beneath me. Funny, because the only people beneath me right now are the ones lying about their own daughter. A ripple tore through the room. My father's face turned stone, my mother's pearls quivered. Adrian didn't need to speak. His silence was power enough. The applause started small, hesitant, then grew from the edges of the crowd. Not for them. For us. And in that moment I realized their empire of whispers had just begun to crack. The cracks widened faster than even I expected. It happened 1 week after the gala, at a city council fundraiser where Adrian was the guest of honor. He'd recently donated a sizable sum to restore a shelter for families displaced by floods. His name was everywhere. The papers, the screens, the speeches. And my parents? They couldn't resist. They showed up, draped in designer clothes, introducing themselves to anyone who would listen. Yes, Adrian is our son-in-law, my mother purred as if she had hand-picked him herself. But fate doesn't let liars eat in peace. Midway through the evening the mayor took the stage. Tonight, he said, we honor a man whose generosity knows no limits. But more importantly, we honor his wife who stood by him long before the fortune, when the hours were long and the paychecks thin. Without her, this empire would not exist. The spotlight shifted. To me. The applause thundered, and suddenly every eye in the room wasn't on Adrian, it was on us. On the truth of us. My hand in his, steady, undeniable. And then came the twist. A journalist from the local paper, sharp, relentless, cut through the crowd with a mic. "Mrs. Marlowe," she asked, her eyes on me, "your parents claimed they didn't attend your wedding because of a scheduling conflict. But records show they hosted a private dinner party that very night. Care to comment?" The room fell silent. I turned my head slowly toward my parents. My mother's face drained of color, my father's jaw tightened like stone. The crowd's whispers became a roar. "They told everyone you weren't worth showing up for," the journalist pressed. "But it looks like they didn't want to be seen with you, until tonight." The air cracked. This wasn't gossip now, this was exposure. Public, permanent. I leaned into the mic, my voice calm, almost tender. "My parents made their choice the night they left me standing alone. They didn't want to be embarrassed by who I loved. And tonight, I think the only embarrassment left in this room belongs to them." The crowd erupted, applause, murmurs, gasps. My mother's hand trembled against her pearls, my father's fists curled at his sides. They wanted to vanish, to melt into the marble floor. But there was no escape. The lie had unraveled, and the world had seen them for what they truly were. Beside me, Adrian kissed my hand. "You didn't just marry me," he whispered. "You freed yourself." And in that moment I knew, their power over me was gone. Forever. After that night, my parents vanished from every circle they once ruled. The charity boards, the luncheons, the gala invitations, all slipped from their hands like sand through a sieve. People still smiled at them in public, but it was different now. Tight-lipped. Pitying. They had become a cautionary tale whispered behind champagne glasses. But they still tried. Letters, emails, even gifts left on our porch, all laced with desperation. They didn't want me. They wanted proximity to Adrian, to the power they thought they could control. I never responded. Weeks turned into months. And one morning, as sunlight spilled across our kitchen table, Adrian placed a steaming cup of coffee in front of me. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked softly. I looked at him, the man who had been called beneath me, but who had lifted me higher than anyone ever had. His hands were rough from years of work, yet his touch was the gentlest I'd ever known. "Not for a second," I whispered. "I didn't lose a family. I just finally saw the truth about them." That weekend, I donated the last gift my parents had sent, a pearl necklace meant as a peace offering, to the same shelter Adrian had rebuilt. The director hugged me, tears in her eyes, and I felt lighter than I had in years. Because revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a quiet refusal, a steady walking away. Sometimes it's letting people drown in the silence they created for themselves. My parents wanted a legacy built on appearances. What they got instead was a legacy of whispers. A story of parents who abandoned their daughter for pride, only to lose her forever. Me. I found my peace in the life they tried to destroy. A life full of love, built not on chandeliers or champagne, but on trust, respect, and the kind of devotion money can never buy. As Adrian pulled me into his arms that night, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't broken. I was free. And freedom, I learned, is the sweetest revenge of all.